All right, so you want to walk into your next coding interview ready to just crush those algorithm questions. Expert speaker and I have been going through all these articles and notes you sent over, and let me tell you, there's some seriously good stuff here.
Yeah, it's true. What we've got here goes way beyond just memorizing algorithms, right?
Yeah.
It's about really showcasing like your adaptability, that ability to break down these complex problems, and how clearly you can communicate all that under pressure.
It's kind of like the difference between just knowing the lyrics to a song versus actually knowing how to play it.
Oh, I like that.
Anyone can memorize, but
Yeah.
like showing you understand the how and the why, that's impressive.
That's a great analogy, and I think it really gets to the heart of why this deep dive is going to be so useful for people. So we're talking about how to nail those coding interviews, but specifically, it's those algorithm questions that tend to trip people up.
Right. Yeah, these can make or break you, for sure. Okay, so the article kind of jumps right in, talking about really understanding the problem, which seems kind of obvious at first, but they emphasize active listening, asking clarifying questions. I get that you don't want to just like start coding blindly, but in an interview setting, how crucial is that really?
Well, think about it this way. In the real world, would you ever start building a house without looking at a blueprint first?
Right. Never.
Understanding the problem fully, that's the foundation for building a good, solid solution. And asking those clarifying questions, it shows the interviewer that you're thorough. You're thinking about potential pitfalls. You're not just making assumptions.
So it's as much about like demonstrating your thought process as it is about getting to the right answer.
Absolutely. And clarifying everything up front, it saves everyone time in the long run,
Hmm.
right? Imagine coding away, going down a rabbit hole, only to realize, oh, I misunderstood this one key requirement.
Yeah. Ouch. Not a good look. The article also talks about repeating the problem back to the interviewer. Is that just like to make sure you understood it, or is there something more to that?
I think it's both.
Yeah.
On the surface, yeah, you're confirming you're engaged, you've grasped those essential details, but it also gives you a chance, and this is key, to rephrase the problem in a way that makes sense to you.
Oh, interesting.
It solidifies your understanding, and it might even reveal some hidden ambiguities that weren't apparent in the initial prompt.
So it's a win-win. You're showing you're engaged and making sure you're on the right track from the get-go. I like it. Now, the article also talks about this idea of identifying the core problem. What do they mean by that?
Okay, so let's say you're given a task, and the task is to find the shortest route between 2 points on a map. That's the surface problem, right? But the core problem, what you really need to solve, might be something like efficiently navigating a graph data structure. So by identifying that core problem, you basically unlock this whole toolbox of algorithms and techniques that are specifically designed to tackle that type of challenge.
So it's like you're stripping away all the extra stuff, the fluff, to get to the heart of what you need to solve, and that helps you choose the right tools for the job.
Exactly.
Speaking of tools, once you've got a handle on the problem, the article talks about brainstorming solutions, right? And it suggests starting with a naive approach. Why start simple when you really want to impress them with how much you know?
It might seem counterintuitive, but starting with a simpler approach, even if it's not the most efficient, is actually a smart move for a couple of reasons. First, it shows the interviewer that you can solve the problem, period, even if it's not the most elegant solution right off the bat.
Okay, so you're showing you have a baseline understanding.
Exactly. And second, starting simple can often spark ideas for optimization later on. It's like you're building that solid foundation before you erect the skyscraper.
So something is better than nothing, and it gives you a starting point to build upon. Okay, that makes sense. But then what about considering multiple approaches, even if you think you've already got a good one? Shouldn't I just focus on making that one solution perfect?
Remember, interviews aren't just about finding the right answer. Presenting multiple approaches, it shows flexibility, a willingness to consider different angles, and the ability to weigh trade-offs, which are all super valuable skills in a real work environment.
So being a thoughtful problem solver is more important than being a know-it-all.
Precisely. It demonstrates adaptability, which is so crucial in any tech role.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, one more thing about this stage. The article talks about thinking out loud, like literally talking through your thought process as you go. Is that actually helpful, or is it just for the interviewer's benefit? Because, I'll be honest, I find that part a bit awkward. It's like I feel like I'm narrating my thoughts.
It's actually beneficial for both of you. For you, vocalizing your thought process, it helps organize your ideas, right? And it can spark those aha moments that you might miss if you were just silently pondering in your head. And then for the interviewer, it gives them a window into how you approach problems, your reasoning, and how well you can communicate those technical concepts.
So it's like giving them a live stream of your brain while you're working through the problem.
Exactly. Plus, it lets them jump in and guide you if you get stuck. Maybe point out flaws in your logic you haven't considered. Think of it as a safety net while you're navigating a tricky problem.
Okay, so it's like a collaborative problem-solving session, which makes a lot of sense. And speaking of which, the article also mentions using examples, even if they're simple. Why is that so important?
Sometimes I get so focused on finding that elegant solution, the one that's going to really wow them, that I forget to actually test it out on real data.
Yeah, I've been there. So you're saying even working through a super basic example can be really valuable.
Absolutely. It's like sketching out a blueprint before you start building that house.
Right.
Using examples, even basic ones, it helps you validate your thinking. You might spot edge cases or potential issues you totally would have missed otherwise.
Oh, okay, so it's about catching those errors early when it's way easier to fix them.
Exactly. And it also shows the interviewer that you can actually apply your solution to some real-world data, not just solve it in theory.
Right, you're not just living in the clouds. You're thinking about how this would actually work in practice.
Exactly. It's a key differentiator, showing them you're not just a theorist, but that you can execute and deliver practical solutions.
Love it. Okay, so you've brainstormed some solutions, you've tested them out. How do you pick the best one? The article mentions evaluating trade-offs. What does that actually look like practically?
So it's all about weighing the pros and cons of each approach, right? How efficient is each solution? How fast does it run what we call time complexity in the biz? And then there's space complexity, which is all about how much memory your solution uses.
Right, because memory usage matters too, especially with large data sets.
Exactly. And beyond the numbers, you also want to think, is the code itself clean, readable, maintainable? How well would it scale if you threw a massive data set at it?
So it's like finding that sweet spot between efficiency, elegance, and practicality.
You got it.
Yeah.
And this is another point where discussing your reasoning with the interviewer is super valuable. They might have insights or preferences you haven't even considered.
Right, because collaboration is just as important as like technical brilliance, especially in a team environment.
100%.
Yeah.
This is not just you showing off, it's also about how well you'd fit into their team. Okay, let's talk about pseudocode for a second. The article really hammered on this one. Why is it so valuable, even if they don't specifically ask for it?
Yeah, it seems like an extra step when you're already under pressure to perform in an interview, right?
Think of pseudocode like a roadmap for your code.
Yeah.
It lets you lay out the logic of your algorithm in a clear, concise way without getting bogged down by the specific syntax of a particular programming language.
So it's like it helps you communicate your solution clearly, no matter what language the interviewer is most comfortable with.
Exactly. And it forces you to think through all the steps in a structured way, which helps prevent errors.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. So it's like you're sketching out your route before you just jump in the car and start driving. It helps you stay on track and make sure you don't miss any turns.
Exactly. Speaking of crucial turns, let's talk about edge cases for a second. Can you think of a scenario where an edge case might trip someone up in an interview and how they could avoid that?
Well, I know from my own coding mishaps that forgetting to account for like an empty data set can really throw a wrench in the works. Is that the kind of thing we're talking about here?
Absolutely. Imagine you're designing an algorithm to process a list of numbers, right?
Yeah.
A super common edge case is that the list might be empty.
Right, because not every list is going to have items in it.
Exactly. And if you're not careful, your code might crash or return some weird result. So anticipate those edge cases before you start writing any code, and then you can build checks into your algorithm to handle them gracefully.
Oh, so it's like you're bulletproofing your code, making sure it can handle anything you throw at it, even those unexpected scenarios.
Exactly. It's the mark of a truly great programmer.
Mhm.
They don't just write code that works, they write code that's robust. Okay, the article also talks about optimization, which is super important. But where do you draw the line between a good, solid solution and striving for absolute perfection?
Yeah, it's easy to get caught up in the weeds trying to make it perfect, and then you end up running out of time.
It's a judgment call for sure. I'd say prioritize clarity and correctness first. Aim for a well-structured solution that's easy for the interviewer to understand, and most importantly, that actually works. Then, if you have time left over, you can circle back and start optimizing.
So it's about demonstrating your thinking ahead without sacrificing a functional solution in the process.
Exactly. Now let's move on to the actual implementation. The article briefly touches on different data structures like arrays, hash tables, all that fun stuff. For our listeners who might not be total data structure gurus, can you give us a quick, relatable example of when you might choose one data structure over another?
Yeah, it's like if you're trying to get across town, are you going to walk, bike, or drive? It kind of depends how far it is, right? For a longer trip, you'd probably want the faster option.
That's a great analogy. Choosing the right data structure, it can have a huge impact on how efficient your code runs. So speaking of efficiency, let's talk about clean code for a sec. When you're in that interview, the pressure's on. What's your number one tip for keeping your code readable, even if you're rushing?
Because I imagine even the most brilliant algorithm gets lost if the code itself is just a jumbled mess, right?
Oh, absolutely. Clean, readable code, it's non-negotiable, especially in an interview setting. It lets the interviewer really follow your logic, see your coding style. If I had to pick just one tip, it's got to be meaningful, variable, and function names.
So no more like, super cryptic abbreviations. Like use names that actually tell you what that variable's all about or what that function's supposed to do.
100%. Think of it like you're writing clear instructions instead of using some kind of secret code that only you understand. It makes a world of difference, trust me. Okay, one thing about this article, it seems to assume that you'll always have time at the end of the interview to go back, analyze your solution, maybe even improve it a little.
Yep.
Realistically, how often does that happen? And if you do find yourself with a few extra minutes, what should you focus on?
Because in my experience, time just seems to fly by in an interview. It's like suddenly it's over.
You're right, it goes fast. And while, yeah, a totally optimized solution might not always be feasible, you can at least demonstrate that you're thinking about optimization, which goes a long way.
Mm.
So if you have a few minutes left, take a look at your solution. Think about its time complexity, its space complexity. Are there any bottlenecks? Any areas where you could maybe tweak things, make it even more efficient? Even just discussing those optimization ideas with the interviewer, even if you don't have time to implement them, it shows that you're thinking critically about your code's performance.
Right. So it's like showing them you're already thinking a few steps ahead, even if you're short on time. Love that. Okay, let's dive into some of the actual techniques the article mentioned. We're talking two-pointer, sliding window, divide and conquer, dynamic programming, greedy algorithms. If our listener only had time to master one of these really well, which one would you pick and why?
You know, if I had to pick just one, I'd say focus on mastering the two-pointer technique.
It's a classic. It really shows how clever and efficient the two-pointer technique can be.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like imagine you have a linked list, which is basically like a chain of elements, each one pointing to the next. You've got two pointers. We'll call them slow and fast. They both start at the beginning, right? But the slow pointer, it moves one element at a time, while the fast pointer, it's zooming ahead two elements at a time. So as they're moving along, eventually that fast pointer, it's going to hit the end of the list.
All right, because it's moving faster.
Exactly. But here's the thing. Because that slow pointer was moving at half the speed, guess where it's going to be?
Right in the middle. It's like magic.
It's so elegant
Yeah.
and way faster than going through the whole list element by element.
Speaking of practice, the article also mentioned a bunch of different resources like LeetCode, HackerRank, and of course those mock interviews. From your experience, which one reigns supreme, especially for people who tend to get a little nervous in those actual interview situations?
Honestly, all of those are super valuable resources, but in my opinion, nothing can truly replace a mock interview. And I'm talking like a real live mock interview, ideally with someone who has experience conducting those technical interviews.
It's kind of like the difference between practicing your dance moves at home in front of the mirror versus getting up on stage in front of an audience, right? Those mock interviews, they put you in the hot seat, help you get used to the pressure, those unexpected questions, thinking on your feet.
That's such a good point. It's all about practicing how you articulate your thought process, how you handle those curveball questions, how you respond to feedback in real time. You can't beat that kind of practice.
So there you have it, folks. Your crash course on absolutely rocking those coding interview algorithm questions. Remember, it's not about memorizing every single algorithm out there. It's about approaching problems strategically, communicating clearly, and showing them you can think on your feet.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And remember, the more you prepare, the more confident you'll be. And that confidence will shine through in the interview.
And one last thought before we wrap up. The article focused a lot on the technical stuff, the algorithms, the code. But don't forget about the human element here. How much do you think your communication style, your ability to connect with the interviewer, how much do you think that impacts your chances of success, even if your technical skills aren't absolutely perfect? Something to think about. Until next time, happy coding.